In recent weeks, the UK has found itself at the centre of a political scandal that has stirred up not only Parliament but the entire country. Rachel Reeves, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, has become one of the most talked about figures in the political arena after her budget initiative caused widespread public outcry. Her decision on economic strategy and new taxes has brought the country to the brink of political and economic instability. As a new figure in high office, Reeves immediately attracted the attention of both her party and the opposition. However, instead of the expected appreciative responses, she faced criticism both within the government and among the people. The budget she proposed disappointed many and particularly worried economists, businessmen, and ordinary citizens. After her announcement of necessary economic measures, social problems have been discussed in a new way. Unemployment continues to rise, inflation is squeezing the wallets of Britons, and Reeves' decision, according to her opponents, has made the situation even worse. Meanwhile, amidst this economic debate, MPs have begun to express their discontent, which has only increased political tensions. Something unexpected happened at the last sitting of Parliament, which came as a real political shock to everyone present. Graham Stewart, a Conservative MP, dared to openly criticise Reeves, calling on the Prime Minister to sack the Chancellor immediately. This statement, made in public, caused everyone in the room to freeze. In his speech, Stewart criticised Reeves' actions, saying that her economic programme is not only not leading to the desired growth, but is also damaging the British economy. He said that the economy, which used to be one of the fastest growing in the G7, is now on the verge of stagnation, and that the tax decisions proposed by the Chancellor are actually jeopardising the welfare of the working class. For Stewart, as the ruling party's spokesman, the moment was a real challenge to the Prime Minister, raising the question of whether it was right to continue to support Reeves in high office. Instead of presenting a plan that would inspire reform and hope, Reeves found herself at the centre of a barrage of criticism. Graham Stewart, who is himself a member of the ruling party, was not afraid to publicly express his discontent, which caused a real shock among many of his colleagues, as well as outrage in the media. His statements became a real political protest, and this criticism from a supporter of the ruling party further undermined the credibility of the Chancellor's actions. The question of how the situation would develop further became an urgent one for everyone who followed the political situation in the country. The Labour Party, which had previously supported Reeves, was now faced with a choice: either defend the Chancellor despite the criticism, or listen to its MPs who were prepared to question Reeves' ability to solve the country's economic problems. It was at this point, with Reeves under pressure, that a fierce debate began about how the government should proceed. Graham Stewart called for immediate action, expressing the view that Reeves' economic policies were short-sighted and could lead to disastrous consequences for the British economy. His words in Parliament were an important signal to the entire political class: it is time for tougher decisions. At the same time, against the backdrop of this political conflict, there were other events that only increased public anxiety. One of these events was the controversial project to build an Islamic center in Lake District, which caused serious confrontation among local residents and construction companies. The construction, which was supposed to be an important milestone in the development of the region, ran into unexpected difficulties. Construction companies and suppliers refused to participate in the project, leading to delays in deliveries and work stoppages. This was not due to official bans or legal difficulties, but rather to the reaction of local residents who expressed their opposition to such a major construction project. The topic of the Islamic Center, which sparked a storm of public debate, touched on issues of local identity, respect for culture, and the need to respect local interests. In response, local government officials said that the project was supported on an official level and that it would be an important center for different communities to communicate. However, for many people, the project became a symbol of a decision made without taking into account the views of local people. This case was a clear example of how large community projects can face resistance if the interests of the people directly affected by the change are not taken into account. The confrontation, which did not result in mass protests but was an expressive rejection of the project, was an indicator that social unrest may take more covert forms, but that does not make it any less significant. Ordinary workers and local suppliers expressed their position by refusing to participate in the construction, and this decision, seemingly small at first glance, became an important symbol of how important it is to consider citizens' opinions before making decisions that could radically change their lives. It is worth noting here that the political atmosphere in the UK in recent weeks has resembled more of a crisis than a simple disagreement within the ruling party. Conflicts between members of the government, such as Stewart's clash with Reeves, reflect a deeper problem, a loss of trust in government, and in political figures who citizens feel are not acting in their best interest. This crisis is not limited to economic issues, it touches on broader issues of perceptions of power, respect for the public interest, and the ability of politicians to respond meaningfully to their constituents. Thus, the Rachel Reeves situation and subsequent events, such as the government travel expense scandals and opposition to major construction projects, underscore not only the economic problems but also the growing discontent of the people toward decision makers. In this environment, with every new announcement drawing criticism and discontent, the UK is on the cusp of important policy changes that could greatly affect the political picture of the country in the future. After Graham Stewart's surprise speech in Parliament when he called for the immediate sacking of Rachel Reeves, the political atmosphere in the UK has become even more tense. Numerous debates and discussions about the event continued not only in parliamentary circles but also in the general public. While the country's politics and economy are at the center of heated debates, it is beginning to be gradually realized that public discontent is not only about the government's performance, but also about the changes taking place in the country. Stewart, in blaming Reeves for economic blunders, voiced more than just criticism. He actually questioned the entire course of a government that he felt was failing to meet critical challenges. This moment became a symbol of growing discontent among not only the opposition but also among members of the ruling party, who began to question the legitimacy of keeping the incumbent chancellor in office. Against the background of these political battles in the UK, another very curious and, as it turned out, very controversial issue related to a major construction project in one of the most picturesque parts of the country, the Lake District. The Ps £2.5 million project to build an Islamic center in the Lake District has found itself in the midst of a public controversy. The construction, which was to be a major milestone in the development of local infrastructure, faced an unexpected obstacle. Local workers and suppliers refused to take part in the project. The construction, which was supposed to start as soon as possible, found itself frozen due to the refusal of local entrepreneurs and workers to participate in the project. This was a real challenge because the project was not just large and expensive but was backed by strong financial and organizational support. While the government continued to state its commitment to support all projects that contribute to the development of the country locally, residents began to actively voice their discontent. Interestingly, this resistance did not lead to mass protests or street actions. Instead, local workers, suppliers, and construction companies quietly but firmly withdrew from the project. They didn't go to rallies, carry placards, or create mass actions. Instead, they simply said, "We will not work on this project." This decision would not seem to have had the same effect if it were not for the widespread publicity, primarily due to the activity on the GB News TV channel, which devoted an entire program to the issue. Covering the project, the channel caused a storm of emotions which quickly turned into discussions both online and in the media. All of this attracted the attention not only of local residents, but also of the entire country, raising an important question about how important decisions should be made in society and whose interests should ultimately come first. The main problem, according to many local residents, was that the project was not agreed upon by them. For many Lake District residents, the emergence of a huge Islamic center was an unexpected and not universally supported decision. Although the project was officially approved back in December 2022 and was presented as important for the development of the local community, for some the decision appeared to be essentially brought on from above. This was part of a wider debate about how large projects that impact local communities should take into account the views of those very communities. As it turned out, most local residents, while not opposed to the idea of an Islamic center, were concerned about the scale of the project and its impact on the architectural landscape and community atmosphere of the area. The problems that arose against the backdrop of the construction were not only related to social perception, but also to practical difficulties. Several construction suppliers refused to provide the materials, including concrete and stone, required for construction. This caused serious delays that made it difficult to start work. Moreover, construction depended on the supply of building materials, which was in danger of being disrupted. This brought the project into question, and the situation itself took on the dimensions of a political scandal. Some local government officials tried to minimize the situation by saying that the delays were insignificant and that the project would still be completed on time. However, for many residents, this has come to symbolize a deeper problem, the problem of local interests and needs being ignored. It also drew attention to issues of local identity and the rights of citizens to voice their opinions on decisions that could affect their lives. In the end, although the project faced difficulties and uncertainties, representatives of the centre tried to reassure the public by saying that problems with the supply of construction materials were temporary. However, the emergence of new challenges in the form of criticism of the project and accusations of disrespect for the local population continued to be at the centre of discussions. People were increasingly concerned that local decisions were being made on the ground without taking into account the views of local people, leading to such confrontations. Instead of using traditional methods of protest, people opted for a quiet but firm refusal to participate in the project, emphasizing their position while sending a signal to the authorities that they do not intend to accept decisions imposed from above. Thus, although the Lake District Islamic Center project is only part of a larger political picture, it becomes a prime example of how important community decisions can be met with resistance. This is not just a project, but an example of how the government must consider citizen opinion before introducing large-scale and meaningful change. Local resistance to this project also reflects a broader trend in society, where people are beginning to express their position quietly but confidently, without loud statements, simply by refusing to participate in something they feel does not take their interests into account. In recent weeks, the topic of excessive public spending has become a hotly debated issue in the UK, sparking a flurry of outrage among ordinary Britons, who are increasingly feeling the effects of rising living costs and economic instability. At the centre of this discussion was Foreign Secretary David Lammy, whose spending on private flights outrageously jumped to more than £1 million in 3 months. When details of his trips on luxury private jets were released, the public reacted with fury, pointing out that such spending was a clear show of disrespect for taxpayers. The most expensive of Lammy's trips, a visit to India for trade talks, cost more than £500,000, a real shock to Britons who have to contend with rising prices for goods and services. These costs have become even harder to take amidst numerous statements from politicians that the public finances need to be more tightly controlled. Many believe that the government should set an example of austerity and responsibility rather than throwing taxpayers' money around. This spending contrasts particularly strongly with the government's efforts to cut spending and increase taxes for ordinary people. One of the most high-profile statements on the subject was Chancellor Rachel Reeves' proposal to introduce new taxes, which her opponents claim will hit the most vulnerable hardest. At a time when ordinary citizens are increasingly forced to save money on their most basic needs, such excessive spending by senior politicians is becoming a real offense. It also undermines the credibility of the government, which critics say is failing to fulfill its obligations to the people. Against the backdrop of the Lammy scandal, the issue of double standards in politics and spending on high office has once again been at the center of public discussion. While ministers and MPs enjoy privileges whose expenditures cause outrage, ordinary citizens feel the consequences of the government's economic policy of cutting social programs and raising taxes. When such contradictions become evident, it causes growing discontent and a sense of social injustice that could eventually play a key role in the upcoming elections. The imbalance in resource allocation evident in such a situation remains an important topic of discussion, and citizens' reactions to these developments only add to the political heat. Amidst the increasingly complex situation of growing citizen discontent, another controversial story was also at the center of the discussion. Public attention was drawn to how one Labour Party MP, Taiwo Watami, found herself at the center of a scandal over the use of public funds to pay rent for her dog. Watami, who represents Coventry in the parliamentary elections, was accused of using funds meant to cover living expenses in London to offset the costs associated with keeping her pet. The dog's owner, who has been active in showing off her dog on social media, has applied for £900 to cover these expenses, which has also sparked a storm of outrage. This was a prime example of how public perception of taxpayer spending can easily lead to a public outburst, especially in the face of growing discontent. The outrage arose not only because of the situation itself, but also because such spending is set against the broader context of a worsening economic situation for citizens. When millions of people are struggling with the rising costs of everyday necessities, such stories seem particularly defiant. Moreover, after it was revealed that Watami had applied for dog expense reimbursement shortly after the 2024 election, it began to look in the public mind like another attempt by politicians to use their positions for personal gain. While some of Watami's defenders argued that this was a standard case of pet fees being charged extra in London, this failed to appease those who saw the situation as yet another example of double standards. The story also reminded the public of larger expenses scandals from earlier, where MPs have tried to get reimbursed for things like pet food or even luxury items. There was a surge of discontent and outrage as these events were reminiscent of the 2009 scandal when many questionable expenses were uncovered, including filing for pet food reimbursements and other unethical expenses. For many Britons, these stories were further evidence that there is a system in politics that allows the rich and powerful to exploit the system for their own benefit. Over time, despite the efforts of the government and some defenders of politicians, the situation of spending on pets and private jets has become emblematic of a wider problem. It shows how unfairness in spending can undermine trust in government and cause public revolt. Many Britons are beginning to ask, how long will they tolerate inequality when politicians, who receive huge salaries and privileges, do not show proper accountability for public money? A host of critical voices point out that such situations undermine not only trust in public institutions, but also in the very idea of public service, where every citizen should feel that their interests are protected and taxes are spent wisely. So with all these discussions and grievances, it can be said that the situation with Lamy of VAT and other expenses scandals has brought British society to the brink. The question of how far these political gains will go is becoming more and more relevant, because not only future political stability, but also citizens' trust in the system as a whole depends on it. When citizens begin to see politics as a tool for personal gain, such crises inevitably lead to consequences that go far beyond specific scandals.